Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Noah looked at his son with a smile as he lovingly held his wife by the waist. They accepted congratulations from the guests. Noah and Wendy did not disturb their son. Today was his rich celebration. Noah was very proud of his son. He and Wendy wanted at least 3 children. But alas, they could not fulfill their dream. They had only one son. Wendy suffered a lot for not being able to fulfill her dream as a mother. But then she came to terms with the fact that she would have no more children. And all her boundless love went to Stephen. Stephen was a wonderful son. He never gave his parents any trouble. And even though they were not poor people, he wasn't spoiled or arrogant. What can I say? His parents' proper upbringing had paid off. Noah and Wendy could be proud to have raised their only child. Right? Stephen graduated from high school with honors, then easily got into university. Studying was easy for him. He had time to party with his friends and study. And after graduation, he immediately started working at his father's firm. Noah dreamed that soon Stephen would take his place and Noah would retire. His share in the firm would remain, and besides, he had worked hard all his life to ensure a secure old age. In another 8 or 10 years, he could pass the firm on to his favorite son with peace of mind. He and Wendy can get on with their second dream of traveling. And all their lives they've lacked the time to do it. Ideally, they wanted to buy a small house somewhere on the seaside and live there, devoting time to each other. And their son and his family would come to visit. That's the life. I still can't believe our son found such a beautiful girl. It's the truest of luck. Truthfully, Noah looked at his wife. Wendy smiled, looking at her son. Noah smiled too and snuggled up to his wife, whispering in her ear, "He deserved this. And so do we. And I'm sure they'll have beautiful children too." Wendy sighed and nodded slightly, shaking her husband's hand. Yes, Stephen was indeed lucky. He had met Christina quite by chance. He was just out of a relationship with another girl at that point. Stephen always felt insincerity coming from the fairer sex. Girls, dating him, were looking for an advantage for themselves. They were with him too nice, courteous, too intrusive, and sometimes demanding. And Stephen was sure that none of them were interested in him as a person. Didn't look at him as if he were just a wallet. And only Christina was different. Only she was sincere. They met when Stephen went into a fancy candy store to buy her mother's favorite candy from her mother. I immediately noticed a pretty girl standing near the marmalade display case. She had such a surprised look on her face that I wondered what had surprised her so much. He walked over to the display case and stopped in front of it, pretending to look at the sweets. He heard the girl mumbling something. He walked a little closer, and then she said, "Only I have the impression that these marmalades came to us from outer space." Stephen looked at the girl in surprise. I don't know who she was addressing, but she was looking directly at him. And Stephen could barely hold back a smile. He looked seriously at the prices and shrugged slightly. "Well, I don't know. Maybe I am. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it actually is." The girl raised one eyebrow from the US to her lips. "No, really. Why is everything so expensive? I mean, it's just regular marmalade. It's made the same way. The ingredients are the same. They're definitely from outer space. I'm telling you, that's a shame. I wanted to give my friend a gift. She loves marmalade. This store was recommended to me. I can see that I only have enough money for a package here, or one marmalade. I can imagine my friend's face. When I hand her such a gift, she'll have to put a check to see that I didn't skimp, spent all my scholarship." And Stephen couldn't stand it and laughed. He had never considered what might be expensive here. To him, it was just ordinary sweets for a perfectly acceptable price. Apparently, the girl was not rich. She thought the prices were cosmic. Word got around, and they got to talking. That's when Stephen pulled a little trick. He said that he had discount cards of this store and that he could sell him sweets with 70% discount. Of course, she was very surprised, but she believed him. She didn't suspect the deception when he paid for the sweets she had chosen. When she tried to slip him the money for the purchase, he didn't want to take it. It was then that the girl became angry. She felt that he had misunderstood her. She didn't want him to think that she only wanted to take advantage of him for her own gain. I had to take it for the money she was forcing him to take. It was only when he took it that she calmed down. Stephen took the opportunity and asked her out on a date. They started dating, and it was just delightful. Stephen had never met such an extraordinary girl. He didn't tell her right away that he came from a rich family. She had no idea. Rich's parents were quite ordinary people. Mom worked as a nurse in a health clinic. Dad died a few years ago, and before that he worked as an ordinary engineer at a factory. The family was not poor, but they were not particularly wealthy. And when 3 months had passed since the day of their acquaintance, Stephen admitted that he was a very wealthy man. She resented him very much. She didn't return his calls for a week, and she didn't want to see him. Stephen came to her house with gorgeous bouquets of flowers, trying to get her to forgive him. Christina insisted that she didn't need it at all. She couldn't forgive him for deceiving her. She thought that he had thus put her to the test, and she resented that he suspected her of self-interest. Maybe she was partly right. I did want to make sure she was after him, not his money. But that was only partly true. In fact, I just liked the way she treated him. When I thought he was just a regular guy, she talked to him about the rising prices of groceries, the high stipend, the overpriced cab fare. She didn't want him to buy her expensive coffee at the coffee shop, flowers in the park. At the movies, she picked the cheapest shows, that sort of thing. Of course, Christina forgave him after a while. They just fell in love, and they could not resist their feelings. Once Rich made up, the guy realized he wanted to introduce her to his parents. I was nervous before the introduction. He knew his parents. They had always been tactful people, and he had no doubt they would like him. He'd just never brought girls home before, and this introduction meant a lot to him. And his parents knew it too. Their son didn't bring just anyone home. It was a very successful meeting. Naturally, the parents liked Christina. She charmed them. Now she was a welcome guest in their home. And a month later, Stephen made her an offer, and soon they were married. And after a while, Christina already began to work at the firm. She was not only a good girl, but also a good worker. Noah was watching his son. Today, they were celebrating Stephen and Christina's second wedding anniversary, and it was truly a very nice celebration. After a couple minutes, Stephen and Christina came up to them. "What are you guys missing?" Stephen asked his parents. Noah shook his head. "No, son, we're just a little tired of all this noise. We're too old for this kind of partying. Me and my mom are better off at home. And you youngsters need to have fun. Life goes by so fast. Before you know it, you won't want to go out anymore. You'll prefer quiet family vacations." Stephen raised his eyebrows and wagged his finger at his father. "What are you talking about? I'm not old at all. And stop talking like that. You have grandchildren to take care of." Noah grinned, but said nothing. Stephen looked at Christina. She nodded slightly to her husband. This Stephen turned to his parents, leaned slightly and said, "All the more reason for it to happen very soon." Noah frowned. "What will happen soon? What do you mean? Will old age come or what?" He didn't understand, but Wendy did. She looked questioningly at her sister-in-law, and she nodded. Then Wendy covered her mouth with her hand to avoid a cry of joy. And then she leaned over to her husband, who still didn't understand, and said in his ear, "You don't mean that we'll be fiddling with grandchildren very soon?" Noah looked at his wife in surprise. Wendy shook her head reproachfully. "Oh, Noah, it's taking you a long time to realize it. We'll soon be grandparents and grandparents and grandparents and grandparents." Shocked, Noah repeated, "Yes, dear, they are going to have a baby." Noah opened his eyes and gasped. He jumped up from his chair. Stephen cautioned him. "Daddy, don't make a fuss. Nobody knows about this yet. We told you first. We only found out a week ago ourselves. And yesterday, Christina went to the doctor." "Oh my God, son, am I happy for you." Oh my God, how happy is that? I hope it's a girl. I'd like a granddaughter very much. Quietly said Noah, approached his son and hugged him. After a couple of seconds, he hugged Christina too, who, smiling embarrassedly, remained silent. For 8 months, Noah and Wendy had been preparing for the birth of their baby. They didn't know who it would be yet. They bought everything they needed, neutral colors. And when they found out Christina was having a girl, they started shopping with renewed vigor. There was no stopping them, no matter what Stephen and Christina said. No matter how much they stopped them from making unnecessary purchases, Wendy and Noah could not stop. It was a joy for them. 8 months later, a baby was born. It was a girl. They named her Nancy. Christina and I were happy, but it was impossible to describe in words the joy that Noah and Wendy felt. They were ready to scream at the world. It seemed to them that they had received the most important gift. The girl was absolutely healthy. After the discharge, everyone immersed themselves in the care of little Nancy. Both Noah and Wendy took an active part in the baby's life. They were willing to do whatever was needed. Christina was completely spared from taking walks with the baby. That was handled by Wendy, the new grandmother. If there was shopping or driving, Noah was in charge. Stephen did the work. Christina drove with the baby, took a lot of vacations at home because the grandmothers were here. And then there was a domestic helper who did all the housework, claiming she could do it all herself. But Wendy convinced her that to refuse help would be very foolish. Darling, you must rest. You'll get faster and sag your psyche. Taking on all the responsibilities of a child and a home is absolutely unnecessary. I even say it's harmful. You need to make time for yourself and your husband. It's all prejudice that a woman should do everything herself and completely immerse herself in taking care of the child. Now it can be avoided, so don't give up on helping me. And it's my pleasure to help you, Wendy was saying. And Christina gave in. She really had a much easier time with her assistant. She had time to rest, to take care of the baby, and to go about her business. And 6 months later, when she had already returned to work with Christina, there was a nanny that Wendy had been carefully selecting for 6 months. Only after careful selection could she find a woman she could trust with her granddaughter. And Christina trusted her mother-in-law, so she wasn't worried at all. In addition, Wendy often visited her granddaughter, watched the order, and the work of the nanny. Stephen kissed his daughter and waved. Nancy laughed merrily and waved back. Bye, my baby. I'll see you tonight. Behave yourself, my favorite girl. Nancy, what's that become? Stephen sent her an air kiss and closed the door behind him. He got into the car. Christina was already in the car looking through some papers. There was a sea of it. My daughter is growing by leaps and bounds. Before we know it, she will be going to school, Stephen said, smiling. Christina did not lift her head from the documents. Don't be silly. Stephen, she hasn't started kindergarten yet. You're already talking about school. Our daughter will only be 2 years old, she replied. Stephen looked at his wife carefully and then glanced at the papers in her hands. He immediately frowned. That's what I'm thinking. So much so that she sighed and leaned back in her seat. Yes, that's what you're thinking. Rick sent me these documents in the mail. I had time to print them out this morning. Our suspicions were correct. Stephen, we have to act. Stephen sighed and looked at the road in front of him. He gripped the steering wheel with his hands and said, Then we must act. We will stick to our original plan. It's the only option that will be right. David has been with the firm for a long time, and he was very close to all of us. Dad and I, we all trusted him. I don't know why this happened, but we have to fix it. He placed his palm on his hand and quietly replied, We'll fix it. Honey, we'll fix it all. Noah sighed and leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses, looked at his assistant. Are you sure this is to be believed, Rick? Rick, Noah's faithful assistant, nodded. Sam said there can be no mistake. Noah rubbed his eyes with his hands. Yes, we have a competent lawyer. He can be trusted. although I was sure this one could be trusted too. Noah scornfully plowed away the documents he had been scrutinizing a few minutes ago. Rick remained silent. Okay, go, thank you for bringing this news. Personally, I'll read everything carefully once again. And tomorrow we will take action. Rick nodded and walked out. Noah sat and thought for a few more minutes and then put on his glasses, going to look through the papers again. But then Wendy came into the office. Noah, will you come with me to my granddaughter's house? Why are you going back to them? You just got back from them. Noah asked in surprise. Wendy shrugged. She called me a couple minutes ago. She and Julik had something important to do. Wouldn't be a couple hours late. So she asked me to go to their place and let the babysitter go. I'll sit on the wall until they get back. I'll put her to bed myself if I have to. What's the big deal? Something to do with the firm? Noah asked with interest. I don't know, Noah. I don't know. It's not like I'm crazy enough to pry into their every move. It's my business to help when I'm asked. So are you coming with me? Or should I call a cab? Noah looked at the paperwork. I'll go. Of course I'll go. I've got some things to do here, but I can do them at their place. Go get ready. I'm just gonna make one phone call. Wendy left the office. Noah looked at the paperwork for a few minutes. Then he frowned and picked up his cell phone. He pressed the call button. Noah waited a long time for an answer. Stephen, I thought you weren't going to answer. Is something wrong with you? My mom said you were running late. I'm fine. Stephen answered him, Dad. It's fine. Yes, we have things to do. But I don't have time to talk right now. We'll talk later. We're in a hurry. Noah glanced down at the papers. Okay. All right. Well, I'll go over to your mom's and me, Stephen. I'm gonna need to have a serious talk with you. There's something I need to discuss with you alone, and I'd rather do it tonight. There was silence. And then Stephen sighed and quietly replied, Okay, Dad, we will. And I need to talk to you about something too. And it's a serious conversation too. I think it needs to be done today too. Noah was a little surprised. Maybe we want to talk about the same thing. He asked his son. Maybe I'll see you tonight, Dad. Say hi to Mom. And Dad, thank you for being so helpful to Nancy and me, and in general. Noah smiled. Who else would we be helping? You're the only one Mom and I have. You're rich, Nancy. We love you very much. We love you too. Dad, come on. Everybody. It's time to go. Christina says hello to you. Noah didn't have time to say anything back. Stephen had passed out. Noah got up, took the documents from the desk, and left the office. In half an hour, Noah was already immersed in the atmosphere of children's laughter, turmoil, and endless noise. For half an hour, he fiddled with his granddaughter, while Wendy did her grandmotherly duties. Then Wendy replaced him, and Noah took a folder with documents, secluded himself in his son's office, put on his glasses, and began to carefully read each sheet. But he couldn't do his job for long. Already in 10 minutes, he received a call from an unknown subscriber on his cell phone. Noah frowned, looking at the screen. For some reason, he was feeling a little uneasy. He sighed and answered the phone. Yes, I'm listening. Yeah, it's me. What's wrong? Who is it? Yes, it's my son. What happened? How? No, this can't be happening. No, yes, I can hear you. I got it. No, okay. Noah put the phone down with shaky hands on the coffee table next to the chair. He sat in a stupor, unblinking. Then he tried to take off his glasses. It didn't work the first time. Finally, he took them off and put them on the table next to the phone. No, this can't be. Oh God, not this. No. Oh, Stephen, no. He kept mumbling something, and then he clutched his heart. A look came over his face, and then he grunted and whispered, God, Len, she can't, but she will. Wendy was playing with her granddaughter sitting on the big cozy couch. When Noah walked into the room, she didn't even pay attention to him. Noah stood in the doorway, saying nothing. And when Wendy finally looked at him, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What's the matter with you? Are you not feeling well? Or did you miss our little baby? Of course, you can't miss a sweet girl like that." "Nancy, David, you're just I don't know how connected," Noah would mutter. Wendy looked at her husband. It was only now that she saw that he had no face on him. Her smile faded a little. She, continuing to play with her granddaughter, quietly asked what was wrong. "It's to do with the firm." "Bad news." Noah clapped his mouth dry, as if he hadn't drunk anything for days. He licked his lips, but it didn't help much. Yes, something had happened. Wendy, Stephen, Christina, Wendy. Wendy realized that something terrible had happened. Her husband's voice was so strange that she immediately realized that he was bringing bad news, terrible news. Wendy looked at her husband and quietly asked, "What? What's wrong?" "Stephen, yeah. What's wrong with them? Did something happen to them?" "Yeah, they're gonna be fine. Tell me right away if they're alive." Noah opened his mouth to answer but was unable to say anything. "Yes, something happened to them. And Wendy, they're not okay. They're gone." He said the last 3 words almost in a whisper, but Wendy heard them. She froze, stopped playing with her granddaughter. She sang resentfully when she realized her grandmother was no longer taking her toy away from her. "No, not again. How could it be? No, Noah, no. We don't say they are. They aren't." Noah made an uncertain gesture with his head. Wendy realized it couldn't get any worse. She realized that at this very second her soul was forever split in two, and the part of her soul that belonged to her son remembered. Wendy wanted to scream for sobs, tear her hair, throw herself off a high cliff, but she didn't even have time to shed a tear from the shock, because then she suddenly thought of another person whom this tragedy touches directly. And that person is not even aware of anything by virtue of the fact that they simply don't realize anything yet. Wendy looked at Nancy sitting next to her, and with her favorite stuffed toy, Wendy shook her head, then looked at her husband. What are we going to do, Noah? What's going to happen now? How do we get through this? I can't. We don't have a choice. We have to do this somehow." Wendy whispered in Noah's trembling voice, not taking her eyes off her granddaughter. "Stephen Ghetto had an accident. Their car went off a cliff and fell into the river. No bodies were found, but an investigator on the phone said they died because the current in the river was rough. The bodies were probably carried by the rushing water because the windows in the car were broken." Noah and Wendy, of course, entertaining hope that their son and his wife had been rescued. But 4 days later, they still hadn't showed up. Those 4 days were the most terrifying of Noah and Wendy's lives. They had to pretend everything was fine because they were with their granddaughter. And how do you explain to a child that their parents are dead? You don't. Noah and Wendy waited for the news. They didn't expect the news to be good. But with each passing day, hope faded, giving way to panic, fear, and terror. And when Noah received the news 5 days later that his son's body had been found, he realized there was nothing more to hope for. If the body had been found, Christina was at the bottom of the river somewhere. Wendy could no longer cope with her fear and terror when she learned that her son's death had been officially confirmed. She became hysterical. Noah drove himself to the lineup. There was no mistake. It is indeed their son. The tattoo on his arm confirmed it. It was damaged and smudged, but there was no doubt. It was a tattoo, vividly customized for him. Noah was heartbroken himself, but he couldn't afford to grieve. How should a father grieve when he received the news of his son's death? What was the news? He saw with his own eyes the dead body of his only son for his wife. Noah could not allow himself to grieve openly, the way he would have liked to. He felt that his wife was on the verge. If he too let slackness slip, would she just lose her mind and the baby? Nancy, their favorite granddaughter. She would be left all alone with no one to look after her. Noah couldn't afford it. He couldn't leave his wife and granddaughter behind. He had to stay as strong as he could. Christina was never found, although the search went on for a very long time. And then Christina was declared dead. They could expect nothing more good. It was all over. Noah and Wendy had lost the two closest people in the world. Now all they had left was Nancy, their only granddaughter, part of their son, an extension of him. Noah frowned and sat in his office at his desk. He was wearing a black suit. After burying his son and his wife's body, which was never found, he wore only black now. Wendy preferred black as well. They were in mourning, and both thought they would never again be able to smile, have fun, and enjoy life. Their only son, their hotly loved child, had died, and only Nancy kept them in this world. She was the only thing they held on to. They had a granddaughter to take care of. Noah sighed and closed his eyes. There were so many thoughts in his head, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was all some kind of evil fate. Everything had happened so fast, and it was after he had learned the truth about David. He wanted to take decisive steps to fix the problem the next day, but he never did. There was no time before that. All this turmoil knocked him out of the loop when he remembered about his employee. It was too late. David had disappeared. Noah kept replaying his son's last words in his head. At least they had time to say something nice to each other. Noah wished he knew what Stephen thought of his family before he died, and that he wasn't afraid. If only Noah had known that this conversation was the last. If he had known, he would have talked his son out of this trip that had so abruptly and tragically torn their lives apart. Just then, Noah opened his eyes and frowned. He remembered that his son wanted to talk to him about something. Noah wanted to tell his son about David, about his stealing, what Stephen wanted to tell him. Why did Noah get the impression then that they wanted to talk about the same things? Maybe I found out about it too, wanted to do something about it. Oh, this is so unbearable. There's nothing more he can find out. Noah picked up his cell phone, made a call. Rick, I need you to tell me to email me the security camera footage from the day of the accident. I want to see what was going on in the office. Yeah, okay, I'm waiting. Noah put the phone away and thought for a moment. Of course, there was no way of knowing where Stephen was going with Christina that day. And why didn't anyone know about their trip? From the sound of Stephen's voice, it was something important and not personal. It was something work-related. Noah was almost certain of it. Why then, did not a single person in their office know where they were going? Why were they acting covertly, and why were they on the highway? A beep sounded. Noah opened his laptop and his email. In a minute, he was already looking at the CCTV footage. It was unlikely that he would understand what had happened that day, but it was only now that he was able to review them. Right now, he was wildly anxious to see his son on his last day of life. He began watching the footage from the morning, putting it on recycle. When his son appeared in the frame, he would stop the tape for a few seconds and then turn it back on normally at the hour of 11 o'clock. David appeared on the tape. Yes, there he was, the thief who had been doing terrible things for a long time. Wow, he's been able to fool everyone for so long without anyone suspecting a thing. Because David forged documents. And as soon as his conscience allowed him to do it, Noah helped him so much, got him out of the mud. That's how David repaid him. There's no explanation for it. And then Noah squinted, looking at the laptop screen. He saw Christina. Stephen's wife was standing in the middle of the office looking for someone. Then she waved her hand, and after a while David approached her. Noah frowned, acting strangely. It was kind of suspicious. She looked around to make sure no one was around. Then she approached David and said something to him. Then she put her hand on his chest and shook her head. Noah saw that David was getting nervous. He looked around too. Then he beckoned Christina to go somewhere. After a moment, Noah saw that they were in the corridor that leads to the winter garden. It was usually crowded there. Always Christina and David were talking about something. It was obvious that Christina was persuading David. She looked into his eyes and kept touching his hand. David was acting strange. He resented it, then shook his head, then nodded, then tried to walk away. but Christina held him by his jacket. Noah pressed pause and tried to take in the situation. What was going on? What were they discussing? What were they talking about? It was acting so strangely, like there was something tying them together. As if Christina was aware of what David was doing. But then if she knew, then she was his accomplice. That could be it. If that's impossible, she couldn't have known. If she knew anything, she would have told Stephen. And then he'd tell her everything about her father. And if she knew and she didn't tell him, Noah frowned even harder. Then you were aware of everything. But I deliberately didn't tell the river. So she was in cahoots with David, and so she was connected to him. And Stephen didn't know that. Maybe he found out, and that's what he wanted to talk to his father about on the day he died, the day he died in the accident. What if? What if Christina wasn't in the car with the crate? What if she was with David at the time and Stephen drove to find out and had an accident on the highway? What makes the investigators think his daughter-in-law was in the car with his son? Yes, they were seen together as they were leaving the office. But it could have gone the other way. He could have dropped her off around the corner. They could have had a fight. She could have said she had to meet a friend. Maybe there was an argument, and Christina dumped Stephen. And then there's the accident. And after the accident, Christina could have guessed that there would be proceedings and that it would turn out that she was in cahoots with the thief and that she would be accused of everything together with David. So she decided to disappear with David. They just dropped everything and ran away. Christina decided it would be better and safer for her. That bitch. How could you? Whispered Noah. Noah was sure his sister-in-law wasn't dead. He was almost certain she wasn't in the car. She just fooled everyone. She'd cheated everyone, and she'd taken her life as she saw fit. And she abandoned her daughter. How mean and cruel do you have to be to do that to your own child? To abandon her daughter to her fate, to disappear without leaving a trace. And Nancy, the poor girl, found herself abandoned by her mother to her fate. Noah clenched his fists tightly and pounded them on the table with all his might. It hurt, but the pain brought him to his senses. How could you? How could you do this to your child? How could you do this to all of us? Why? He screamed. Then he did the whole exchange. What's the use of talking about all this? The son isn't alive. The daughter-in-law is a horrible girl, missing. And Noah was sure that her body would never be found because she is alive, and her disappearance is closely connected to David's disappearance. We had to get right down to the business of unmasking him that same evening to decide everything. And he didn't. He wanted to talk to his son first, to consult him. Only he'd done it for nothing. He had only wasted precious time. If he'd acted the minute he did, his son would still be alive. Noah cried, covering his face with his hands. For a long time he had been holding back, and now he just couldn't be strong anymore. His son's life had been cut short so suddenly and tragically, and his own life was ruined. They have Nancy left, and they must think only of her. For her sake they must live. And that thought kept him still. He cried to vent his grief, the fear, the horror. He cried so he could pull himself back together and be strong. To be strong for Wendy and for the wall of their beloved granddaughter. Wendy looked at the things on the bed with a smile. Then she stepped back and folded her arms across her chest, tilting her head to the side. She said, "Well, I think it's pretty good, really. And I think you'll like it here, and it's the right size. What do you think?" A girl about 9 years old walked over to the bed and stood in the same pose as her grandmother. "Yeah, it's not bad. I think it's not bad at all. And size-wise, I think it'll all fit." Wendy laughed. "Imagination. Why are you copying me? I'm the one who looks so funny." "I don't believe it, Nancy. I don't believe it. You're exaggerating." Nancy laughed too and went over to Grandma. She hugged her and said, "Of course I'm copying you. That's exactly what you look like. Grandma, I love you, but you exaggerate too much sometimes too. Why so many things? I can't carry them for the day." One jacket was enough. And you bought 3. What do I need them for? Well, Nancy, I want what's best for you. You can choose anything you like. I'll return the rest. What's the problem? There's no problem. All right, enough of this idle talk. Let's just try everything on. I can't wait to see you in that dress. There's a loss of palms before we get to the fitting. Wendy looked at her granddaughter and exulted at what a wonderful little girl she was. Many people have said that Wendy and Noah are overprotective. They let her do a lot of things, spoiling Nancy. But Wendy herself didn't see it that way. They've been parenting for all of 7 years. Nancy, right. How do they raise their son? Of course, there's a difference between a boy and a girl. But that's not the point. The very principle of upbringing was the same. To instill the right values, to teach goodness, and do everything to make the child happy and appreciate his loved ones, respect others. They succeeded in all this. Nancy was similar to their dead son in character, and often Wendy felt goosebumps running down her body from the strong resemblance between them. At times she would look into Nancy's eyes and felt like she was seeing her son. Wendy thanked God that he had given them this child, otherwise she simply would not have been able to live. After Stephen died, an hour later, all the clothes Nancy had already tried on. They both evaluated, each image drawing their own conclusions. A few things had to be returned, but most of the things fit. Wendy was proud that her and her granddaughter's tastes matched. They are on the same page, as Nancy said, often about her grandparents. That's it. Now go do your homework. Don't you want a snack? Nancy shook her head. No, I'm not hungry yet. A little later, she was just about to leave for her room when there was a knock on the door. Yes, come in, Wendy replied. The door opened and Noah walked in. He immediately smiled when he saw his granddaughter. Wendy looked at her husband with a smile. How he had sat for those 7 years. Although Wendy had also sat dramatically after her son's death, she could hide her gray hair. Regularly visiting the beauty parlor, Noah naturally did nothing. Wendy watched Noah delight in her granddaughters. Nancy had a special feeling for her grandfather. It was as if she was trying to find in him the support of a father rather than a grandfather. And Noah tried in every way possible to make sure that Nancy found in him what she needed so much. What's the matter with you? You come in the house and you're up against the wall. Did you at least wash your hands? Did you wash your hands? Did you wash your hands? Don't worry. Who else am I gonna run to? If not to my favorite girls. Wendy's on the wall. So how are you doing? How was school? Asked Noah. Nancy hugged her grandfather and then pulled away from him and shook her head. School is fine, as always, and Grandma and I are having a fitting. Look how many things she bought me. While I was at school, she bought it all. She couldn't stand it. She didn't wait for me on the weekend. By the weekend, all the sizes will be gone, and there won't be anything left. So I decided to buy it all at once. Wendy objected. Your grandmother spoils you. Oh, she spoils me. And what will you be the most fashionable now? I'm sure Grandma bought you the most beautiful things. Maybe she'll show you something. Nancy shook her head. No, I don't need these lessons to do, Grandpa. And then I'll show you, all right. Lessons are very important. Of course, you'll show me everything later. And dare I detain you any longer, young lady? Go and study. Nancy smiled and ran out of the room. Noah looked after her and then turned to his wife. You buy too much stuff, don't you think? Wendy shook her head. No, I don't think so. She refuses to go shopping with me all the time. She says she's got enough stuff. Noah, she's growing up. She needs new things all the time. She's all about making sure we don't waste money. Who are we wasting money on? She's the only one we have, so we'll spend it on her. Noah smirked. Wendy began to pack the bags, and he went to his office. An hour later, having solved all the cases connected with the firm, Noah leaned back in his chair tiredly. It was hard for him to do everything. He was lucky that he had such a great deputy. Christopher had been working for him for 9 years, and after the death of his son Noah had given him most of his responsibilities. It was Christopher who helped the firm not go bankrupt when these machinations that David was turning around surfaced. Thanks to Christopher, they were able to get through the crisis without repercussions. He was a smart guy, and Noah trusted him, even though he had promised himself that after David he wouldn't trust anyone else. But at that moment he had no way out, and he didn't care. But Christopher had sorted it all out, while Noah had come to his senses. Noah sighed and looked at the picture frame on his desk. Stephen was smiling at him from there. There used to be a picture of Stephen, Christina, and Nancy here. After his son died, Noah threw that picture away. He had replaced it with this one. Next to it was a frame with Nancy's picture on it. And you were no longer here. After the accident, Wendy and Noah took the girl in with them for good. Nancy didn't realize what was happening. She was only supposed to be 2 years old at the time. It was hard to raise a granddaughter. Was it hard to process the loss? Nancy kept them moving forward. They kept their sanity for her. Nancy kept them going. They just didn't have time to wallow in grief, to grieve. Caring for a 2-year-old child kept them from thinking bad thoughts. It was as if the child sensed that grandparents should not be allowed to slack off. Gradually, Wendy and Noah were able to shake off the feeling that nothing else would make them happy. It wasn't. What pleased them was Nancy. It was as if they had become her parents. They felt that the girl desperately needed them. They desperately needed her. Soon they had taken custody of Nancy. They were now her legal representatives. Nancy was growing up very fast. Well, Noah seemed to think so. Soon she was in kindergarten. And contrary to the universal belief that rich people only give their children to private kindergartens, where groups consist of 5-7 people, and where 2 teachers and 3 nannies lick the children from head to toe for the sake of peace of mind, they're rich and arrogant parents. Noah and Wendy put Nancy in a public kindergarten, even though it was the best kindergarten in town and the newest. Nancy went to a group where there were 25 other kids besides her, where it was noisy. The kids were often sick, and she was happy. Wendy had no regrets. Their granddaughter was growing up in an ordinary environment among ordinary children in ordinary conditions with ordinary problems. They did not want Nancy to grow up spoiled. It worked out for them. After kindergarten, Nancy went to school. That was 2 years ago. Wendy chose the school even more carefully. There were various clubs, extra classes, language classes, and even a swimming pool. Nancy was busy to the max. She studied well. There were no problems with her. She continued to please her grandparents. Noah was very happy about that. Everything was normal. The pain from his son's death hadn't gone anywhere. It had subsided. Yes, it almost didn't torment Noah, but it didn't go anywhere. His son. He remembered every day. He even talked to him, talked to his picture on his desk, told him how they were doing, how his daughter was growing up, and how happy she made her grandparents. And periodically Noah would bring up that bastard who had been stealing from the firm. And that daughter of his, Christina, who had dropped everything and run away, invaded their trust, meddled in their family, and then ruined everything. That bitch is still gonna pay for everything she did, and for abandoning her daughter to her fate. And David would pay. Noah knew he would still pay for all his deeds. Noah pulled out a desk drawer and opened a secret compartment that was hidden under the file folders. Noah took out a stack of documents from this compartment and placed it on the desk. These were the very documents that could be used to put David behind bars. Of course, maybe after 7 years these documents were useless. Noah had not consulted a lawyer, but it didn't matter. Noah kept those documents to remember everything. Noah hid the documents back in the compartment. And then Wendy walks in. Nancy's already asleep. Why don't you go rest? Lots of work to do. Noah shook his head and held out his arms to her. No, there's no more work. It's okay. I was just thinking. Sitting there, remembering our son, thinking about the wall going to me. Wendy walked into the office. She walked over to the desk, sat down on the windowsill of the chair, and looked at the picture of her son. Noah snuggled up to her, closing his eyes. How blessed was he to have Wendy. He couldn't have done it without her. He couldn't have done anything without her. She inspired him, supported him, comforted him. She was his muse. You know, I had a dream about Stephen today, Wendy said quietly, looking thoughtfully at her son's picture. Noah tensed when Lena dreamt about someone from the dead. Did it mean something? She had some kind of intuition, and it felt like it. And what was the dream? What was it? Noah asked quietly. Wendy sighed and answered. She spoke to me, Noah. He said he missed me. He missed you. The wealth part too. Hearing the last phrase, Noah pulled away from his wife slightly. Christina misses you. Well, understandably, because she's not dead at all. Like I said, she's alive and living a life of pleasure, oblivious to her past. Wendy patted her husband on the shoulder. She was of a different opinion. Noah, really, how do you know? It's all your guesswork. You can't know anything. And you're making speculations that have no basis in fact. Why would you do that? I'm sure Christina couldn't have done this. She loved our son and her daughter. She loved us. She was sincere, kind. She would never do that. She wouldn't abandon Nancy. I would have sensed the slightest lie. I never felt anything like that. She was a good wife, a wonderful daughter-in-law, the best mom. I'm sure of it. How do you know that? That's just your speculation. There's no body, so none of us will ever know exactly whether she's dead or alive. And you know you can't change my mind. I haven't changed my mind in 7 years and I never will. Wendy shook her head, but said nothing. After a couple minutes, Noah calmed down and asked, So what was yours with her? You never told me. Wendy sighed and continued. He misses all of us, and he asked that we go to church. I also saw some weird picture, like he showed me, but I'm not sure. And I don't know. It looked like a church, but it wasn't a church. It was some kind of an orphanage or something, or a monastery. I don't know, but there was a river there. This place was near the river. It was a very beautiful place. When I saw it, I just wanted to be there. A church, a river, you say. I wonder if we could go somewhere together with Nancy. We all need a vacation. It wouldn't hurt. We'll all spend some time together and go for a walk. I think Nancy would be pleased. Wendy smiled and stroked her husband's head. Yes, she will be very pleased. His wife's dream never left Noah's mind. All the next day, he thought only of that dream. And when he got home, he did his chores. He opened his laptop and started searching for something similar to what his wife was talking about. Half an hour later, he saw a place that resembled the picture from Wendy's son. It was a convent. It had a shelter for people who had lost themselves in life and were trying to find the cause of it to heal their souls. The grounds of the convent were very large. It was divided into a part that a normal person could not get into. And there was a chapel and a church where unhappy and lost people could pray and beg for forgiveness. There was also a small park with no special features. You could walk there and enjoy the fresh air and nature. And there was a river nearby. And Noah suggested to Wendy that they should all go there together. Nancy had often wondered what people who served God looked like, and it would be interesting to see this place. There were relics of some saint in the church. It would be good to visit such a place. Wendy gladly agreed, and Nancy was glad that they would go on a little trip. It had been a long time since they had been away together. Noah made preparations for the trip the next day, and on Saturday morning they hit the road. It took a little over 200 hours to get there, but the time flew by. They had fun chatting about everything in the world. Nancy was very interesting to talk to. She was such a smart, intelligent, inquisitive, and interesting conversationalist. She made her grandparents laugh all the time, and she herself laughed at how gullibly they listened to her as she made up all sorts of stories. Only once did Wendy guess that the girl had made up some other tall tale. When they arrived, they went straight out for a walk. Noah had called ahead of time, and arranged for them to book a cottage in a village not far from the monastery grounds. It was about a 5-minute drive from the village to the monastery, and it would be about 15 to 20 minutes of walking. It's quite rewarding. They settled down in the lodge and went straight to the monastery grounds. Nancy was very happy. She had never been in a village before. Everything was new to her. Wendy and Noah smiled as they looked at their granddaughter. For a few hours, they walked the grounds all together, holding hands. Then Wendy went to church. She wanted to celebrate Mass. Noah and Nancy continued walking. Soon they were tired, and Noah suggested that his granddaughter sit on a bench. He opened the passable bag they carried with them. He took out a thermos of hot tea and some scones. Nancy sat on the bench, drinking the tea, eating the scone and chattering her legs. Noah leaned back on the back of the bench and looked at the people walking by. And then a certain nun caught his attention. The woman and the children's ear was wearing a dark robe down to her heels. She was walking quite slowly towards them. So as she approached, Noah was able to make out her face. And as soon as he saw her face, he went cold. This nun looked just like Christina. This girl was paler, but the resemblance was striking. If he saw her eyes, and they were green, Noah would have been even more surprised. But he couldn't see her eyes. She walked with them down. As she came even closer, Noah felt goosebumps run down his body. No, really, how much did she look like Agatha Christie? There are such similarities between people. If Christina had a sibling, Noah would have thought it was her. As the nun walked past and clapped, Noah got a strange feeling. It seemed to him that something extraordinary was happening. He wanted to talk to this nun. He desperately wanted to see the color of her eyes. Noah turned to Nancy and said to her, "Nancy, sit down for a moment." He jumped off the bench and caught up with the nun. "Excuse me, could you help me?" As soon as he touched her shoulder, Nancy jerked sharply and turned around. As soon as Noah saw her eyes, he froze. He was at a loss for words because standing in front of him was Christina, the wife of his dead son Sterep. He stood and looked at her. She stood looking at him. Her eyes expressed nothing but fright. When she turned around, she took a step back from Noah and remained standing there. They continued to stare at each other. Noah immersed himself in the girl's green eyes. He felt like he was seeing a ghost. "Christina." At last he spoke. The nun stood still for a while. Then she shook her head. No, you've made a mistake. My name is Sister Anna," she said. But as soon as Noah heard her voice, he realized that he was not mistaken. Christina was standing in front of him, and for some reason she claimed her name as her sister Anna. At first Noah wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her violently. Then he wanted to scream in her face, blaming her for the death of his only son. But then he pulled himself together and soberly assessed the situation. It's looking at him like he's a stranger. It doesn't recognize him. How is that possible? Is she really pretending? But if she was faking, her face would show some excitement. Her face expressed nothing at the moment, only genuine bewilderment. "No, it's you. Don't you recognize me?" asked Noah, a little quieter. Christina shook her head. Her eyebrows rose at Noah's scrutinized face, then frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, but you have me confused with someone else. We have a sister Christina at the convent, but she doesn't look anything like me. My name is Sister Anna. If you need to see Sister Christina, I will call her," the girl said. Her voice was completely calm. And Noah realized that she really did not recognize him. He was very surprised. And then he saw the silhouette of a thing hanging around her neck under her clothes. Noah looked closely, and he thought it was a ring. He looked at her neck. Yes, there was a string. Most likely the ring was hanging from the string. And then he said quietly and slowly, "It's me. I'm Noah. You're wearing something around your neck. It's a ring, right? It's your ring that used to be on your hand." As soon as the girl heard about the ring, and her hand twitched, and she placed it on her chest, She collapsed slightly and took a step back, then another. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but she couldn't make a sound. Finally, she stopped. She turned even paler. Then she moved closer to Noah. She gazed greedily at his face, scrutinizing every millimeter of his skin. "Noah, I don't understand." Christina muttered. "Yes, grandfather, you there soon," shouted Nancy from the bench. When Nancy heard the child's voice, she all twitched and looked towards the bench. She saw the girl. Nancy's hand crept to her mouth, covered her mouth with her hand. And then she looked at Noah. It muttered to her. Noah realized that Christina did not remember anything. In some incredible way, she had lost her memory. What had happened to her? He didn't know, but he certainly didn't remember anything. Now he saw a glimmer of memory in her eyes. When she saw the child, she turned even paler, though it seemed impossible with her complexion. "This is your daughter, Christina. This is Nancy. This is Stephen's daughter and your daughter. Do you remember her?" And then Christina gave a loud shriek. She immediately covered her mouth with her hands. Her eyes were brimming with tears. She looked at Noah with horror, and then she shook her head desperately. Christina jerked strangely, as if she were about to fall. Noah grabbed her hands, trying to hold her up. "Christina, what's wrong? Are you sick?" The girl shook her head. Then she grabbed Noah's shoulder. It all seemed impossible. It was as if Noah were on the set of some movie. There was action going on all around him, and he didn't understand how he had gotten here. But it was all true. There was a girl in front of him, a girl who had been thought dead, who had even been buried, and now she was standing in front of him, clutching his shoulders. And Noah didn't know how to react to that. For a very long time, very many years, he had considered her a traitor. He thought she was a thief. He had hated her with all his soul, and now he didn't know what to do. If Christina had lost her memory, how had all this happened? And where had she been all this time? Why hadn't anyone gone to the police when it was discovered that this girl didn't even know who she was? Why did Christina find herself wearing a nun's vestment and calling herself Sister Anna? So many questions, and not one question Noah knew the answer to. "It's okay, I'm fine." "You, Noah? I remembered you. You're the dad. I'm the mom. Wendy, that's right. Your wife's name is Wendy." Noah nodded, continuing to support his girlfriend's girlfriend. Christina closed her eyes, clenched shut, and her hands clutched desperately at Noah's shoulders. For a while she stood like that, trying to quiet the trembling. Then gradually she calmed down. She looked into Noah's eyes again and quietly said, "This is a girl. That girl on the bench is my daughter. That's Nancy." "Yes, that's Nancy. That's your daughter," replied Noah. "What about Stephen with the box?" "He's here. He hasn't lost his memory," Christina asked hopefully. And then Noah realized that his daughter-in-law did not even know that her husband had died. So she really wasn't in the car with him. So what was she doing here, and why had she lost her memory? Did David try to get rid of her? He has to find out everything. She has to tell him everything. If she starts remembering everything now, if she remembered him and Nancy now, she must remember everything else. Stephen is dead. He died 7 years ago. He died in an accident. You didn't know about the accident. Of course I did. How would you know if you weren't there? Christina shook her head slightly. I was there. I was in the car with her when we went off the cliff. Jesus, he's dead. I thought we could both be saved. And then I thought, God, he's dead. And then Christina started crying. Noah was confused. He tried to comfort Christina, but there was no way she could stop crying. It was only after a few minutes that she was able to pull herself together. She looked at her daughter again. And then she said quietly to Noah, I have to go now. I have to go to my mother and tell her that I remembered everything. Noah shook his head. No, you're not going anywhere. You're going to tell me everything first. You have to tell me what happened and why Stephen died and you survived. Noah, I promise you I will tell you everything. I remember everything in an instant. I don't know how it's possible. I've been here all these years, and I can't remember anything. Not one single detail. All I saw was this ring on my finger. I felt it had something to do with my past. I took it off and hung it on a string around my neck. Every night I take it out and touch it to my cheek. I try to remember who I was in my past life. I've never been able to. Noah, I'll tell you everything. But I just have to go to my mother first. I have to tell her I'm not alone now. She'll let me go right away. I'll come back to you. I promise. Christina squeezed his hand tightly. Noah was forced to let her go. This girl spoke very convincingly. She could always speak convincingly. Now, 7 years later, Noah understood what his wife meant when she said she had never lied. Hatred and anger filled his soul. So Noah had forgotten what his son's wife was really like. And now he saw. But still, he thought that there was some surprise waiting for him, and that Christina would try to deceive him. Maybe she would come and tell him some nonsense, and he'll believe her again. How can he recognize that she's deceiving him? Can he do that after 7 years? Christina's gone. Noah went back to Nancy. Who was that grandfather? Why was she crying? Nancy asked. Noah looked after her. He saw the girl hurrying away in the direction of the convent, and he really hoped that she had not deceived him, that she would come back. Then Noah turned to Nancy and said, "This is an acquaintance of mine. She'll be back with us soon, and I'll introduce you to her. And here comes Grandma. Let's wave to her." Nancy waved to her grandmother, and she waved back. As Wendy approached the bench, she looked at her husband and frowned slightly. "So I see something's wrong. Tell me right away." "Heart attack. Been walking too long." But Noah shook his head. "No, I'm fine. I feel fine. Don't worry." But Wendy squinted suspiciously. She looked at her husband. Then, "No, something's definitely wrong. I can see that you're agitated. You have sweat on your forehead. Maybe you think that after all these years you can deceive me. Well, you're wrong. You can't fool me. I can see perfectly well that something's wrong. Tell me everything now." Noah looked at Nancy, then he sighed and said to Wendy, "I met someone." Wendy grinned. "Well, who did you meet?" "I met someone very important, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. You'll see for yourself. This woman is coming to see us now. I hope she does." Wendy raised the woman's eyebrows in surprise. "You've met a woman? That's very unexpected." "Met who?" "Someone we know." Noah repeated again. "Will you see for yourself soon? Here she comes." Noah pointed in the direction. Wendy followed his gesture and grinned in surprise at the nun. "You met a nun? What's so unusual about this place?" "Wait, Wendy, she'll be here in a minute and you'll see." Wendy shrugged, turned toward the nun, and folded her arms across her chest. When the nun came closer, Wendy made a vague sound. Then she turned to Noah. "That's what I see. Or I'm imagining it, Noah. Tell me I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy, Wendy, and what you see is what you see." Wendy turned toward the nun again. Christina, meanwhile, had almost reached them. As she approached Wendy, she smiled slightly and said, "Hello, Wendy. I don't know if you're happy to see me, but I'm very happy to see you. This couldn't be worse. How is this possible? It's just unbelievable." "When they say it's you," Christina nodded. "Yes, that's me." "Oh my God, Christina. I knew you were alive. I knew you weren't dead. No one believed me. I felt like you were alive. Noah told me some scary things about you, but I never believed them. We agreed on some things, though. He also believed you weren't dead already. I'm talking nonsense. It's just the shock of it. Let me hug you." Wendy embraced her. The woman was crying bitterly, hugging her sister-in-law. She mumbled something in her ear, but she couldn't make out a word. She embraced her mother-in-law in a confused manner, stroking her back. Noah watched them, and then he heard Nancy ask Grandpa, "Is this aunt's name like my mom?" As soon as she heard her daughter's voice, she looked at her. Wendy pulled away from Christina and turned toward her granddaughter as well. Noah was silent. He couldn't tell Nancy that her own mother was standing in front of her. Wendy, on the other hand, did not remain silent. She walked over to her granddaughter, took her hand, and said, "Nancy, my dear granddaughter, this is your mother. Nancy, this is your mommy who was missing." 7 years ago, Nancy had a look of shock on her face. She opened her mouth in surprise. She stared at her mother and didn't say a word. And then she finally said, "Mom is my mom. Grandpa, it's true, my mom." Now Noah had to answer his granddaughter. "Yes, Nancy is your mom." Nancy sort of oddly oohed and awed and got up from the bench. She slowly approached her mother. "Hello, my daughter. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I didn't know. I didn't remember," Christina said pitifully. And then Nancy rushed to hug her. Wendy started crying at once. Noah squinted at the picture that unfolded before him. He had not yet learned the whole truth. Noah and Wendy took Christina to their village, and for hours on end, Christina was by Nancy's side. The girl didn't want to let her mother go one step away from her. And Noah accepted the fact that he would only know the truth when Nancy went to bed. That day, Nancy went to bed later than usual. There was no way she could calm down. Meeting her own mother, whom she had not seen for most of her conscious life, had stirred her up very much. Wendy could barely calm her down and get her to go to bed. Nancy kept fearing that Christina would disappear again. But Christina promised that she would never leave again. When Nancy fell asleep, Noah said, "Come on, let's go outside and talk. I need to know everything. I want to know everything that happened. If you remember, of course," slightly mockingly, he said as she looked at him carefully. "Of course I remembered everything. And why do I get the feeling that you want to accuse me of something? You want to know what happened. I'll tell you everything. There's nothing to hide." When they went outside, they sat down on a bench outside the house. For a few minutes they sat in silence, listening to the sounds of nature. Then Christina asked, "What do you want to know?" "I just don't know where to start." "I want to know what you had to do with David." "I had nothing to do with him." "Then why did you want to run away with him?" "What are you talking about, Noah?" "I didn't want to run away with anyone." "What makes you say that? Where did you get such stupid information from?" Noah said with anger, "Don't lie to me, Christina. Don't try to trick me. You won't succeed. I have a rough idea of what happened, but I want details. I also want to know why you did this to my son, and what I did to your son," and handed him over to Christina, without pretending like you don't understand. "I understand the memory loss and all that, but you've only got me now," Noah replied angrily. Christina sighed heavily. "So I take it you've got a lot on your mind here. Let me start at the beginning. I'm going to tell you everything that happened. If you have any questions, you can ask me. That's fine." Christina and Stephen suspected David Pavlovic of stealing much earlier than Noah knew, and Christina immediately suggested to Stephen that they tell his father. But Stephen refused. He was going to take over the management of the firm completely in the future, and he wanted to prove both to his father and to himself that he would be able to cope with any difficulties. It was Max who first suspected David of stealing. He was a friend of Stephen's and also worked at the firm. It was only Max's suspicions, but he had some incredible instincts, and Stephen always listened to his judgment. And when he found out that Max suspected something wrong, he became alert and began to dig deeper. And soon Stephen found out that David has long been engaged in serious fraud, and if he continues to do this, then in a couple of years, the firm will go bankrupt through his fault, and they will have to declare bankruptcy. And John did not understand how David managed to fool everyone for a long time. And most importantly, David had managed to fool Noah, who considered himself an experienced businessman. But that wasn't the important thing. The most important thing was that Stephen had figured it out, and he had proof in his hands that David was stealing. Christina had received this evidence in the mail. That morning, the day of the accident, she and Stephen decided that they would talk to David. Stephen did not believe that David had spent all the money he had stolen, so he decided to have a serious talk with David. He wanted to tell him to return the whole amount. If David agreed, the case would be closed. They wouldn't report him to the police, but he would just return the money and resign. That would have been the best option for David. Why had Stephen decided to do that? Christina didn't know, but it seemed to her that Stephen just wanted to be like his father. His father had always helped people who needed help. Tarek decided to do an honorable deed, and that was his mistake. When they arrived at the firm, Stephen talked to David, but the latter did not agree with him. He didn't believe that Stirrup had anything against him that would put him behind bars, and he claimed he hadn't stolen any money. After that conversation with David, Christina decided to talk to him. She thought he might be able to get David to do what Stephen asked. It was this conversation that was on the videotape. Christina talked David into agreeing to do it. She even showed him one of the documents that proved David's guilt. David almost went ballistic when he found out that they actually had something against him. He first tried to threaten Christina, but then he suddenly agreed. He said he would pay back the full amount. He confessed to everything and said he would give it all back himself as long as they didn't report him to the police. And he said they should come to his country house. Then he would give them all the money. And Stephen agreed to it. After work, he and Christina were supposed to go to his place. That's when Stephen called his mother and asked her to babysit Nancy. He then called his father. After talking to Noah, Stephen and Christina hit the road. As soon as they got on the highway, Stephen felt that something terrible had happened. He realized that the brakes were not working. He tried to get out of the situation somehow. He didn't want them to get hurt. He tried to stop the car on the corners, but on the next corner they went off into a cliff. Christina remembered every detail of what had happened. She remembered how they flew down into the river. And she remembered how they were able to break the windows right away. And Stephen had climbed out of the car first, and then helped Christina out. They gripped their hands tightly, trying to swim out of the river. But then suddenly they were caught by the current, and their hands were scattered. And Christina most likely lost consciousness. The last thing she remembered was her husband's terrified face. I don't know how I got this far, or how I stayed alive. I don't remember how I got there, or how they found me. I don't remember anything. I regained consciousness in the monastery. They didn't find me on the beach. They thought I was dead, but I was alive. I didn't regain consciousness, but I mumbled something inaudible. They'd brought me to the convent. I lay unconscious for a week. I don't know why they didn't call the doctors, why they didn't take me to town. I don't know. They just prayed I'd survive. I did. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. I had completely lost my memory. I was alone and scared, and I had a gold ring on my finger, but I didn't remember it. Where did it come from? I didn't remember my name. I didn't know how old I was. They didn't give me a name otherwise. They called me Sister Anna. They put monk robes on me. And from that moment on, I lived here. God, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have looked for you further. For some reason, they were looking for you at the crash site and at the end of the river, and here, in the convent. I don't know why they didn't look for you here, Noah muttered. Maybe they did. Maybe they did. But men in uniform are not welcome here at the monastery. Maybe they didn't let them in. Maybe they said no one was here. Maybe they didn't admit they'd found me. I don't know what it was really like. I don't even want to know. They saved me. That's good enough for me. Christina answered. Why did the brakes fail? And when she sighed and answered, I think David set it up. I think he ruined our car. He wasn't going to give us all the money. He was going to disappear. I realized that when I talked to him. He mentioned a place to me. Then he quickly changed the subject. And when he realized we were serious, he decided to just eliminate us. He was too greedy. He's the real deal. If he did it. If he ruined the car, he's the reason my son died. I just destroyed him. I will find him, and I will destroy him. We have to find him. We need to make him pay for what he's done. Noah said with feeling. They were silent for a while. Christina thought about her daughter, who was already so big. Noah thought about his wife's dream. She dreamed about her son who missed Christina, so he was the one who had brought them here to find his wife. He wanted them to find her. She'd find out the truth, and they'd take her with them. He was leading them down the right path, and they did the right thing in coming here. The fact that Wendy had that kind of intuition is why they came here. If it hadn't been for this magical event, they never would have met Christina. It would never have even occurred to them that they should come here. I'm sorry, Christina. All these 7 years I've thought bad things about you. I thought you were responsible for my son's death. I saw that videotape of you talking to David, and for some reason, I thought you were in cahoots with him. I thought you were his accomplices. I thought you betrayed Stephen. And I'm sorry I thought so badly of you. I know you've never given me a single reason to think of you that way. I don't know what came over me. I was just grief-stricken and trying to find someone to blame. And then this videotape. I thought you'd run off with him, that you abandoned Stephen and your daughter. I realize now that that's crazy. I don't know what's gotten into my head. Christina sighed heavily and put her palm on her father-in-law's hand. I forgive you, Noah. Were you grief-stricken? Yes, as I am grief-stricken. Now it turns out that I've only just learned of my husband's death. The only reason I'm holding it together is because of my daughter. She's 9 years old now. I missed so many years of her life. I want to make up for it. I want to go back and be with my daughter. I want to go to my husband's grave. I want to mourn him. Supposedly, for all those 7 years, I was not living in my body. It was like I was a different person. And now, thanks to you, I found myself again. And I have to live my life. So I don't hold it against you. You saved me. You came and you saw me and you saved me. I'm very grateful for that. Noah suddenly cried. Rich hugged him. But that didn't comfort her. All these 7 years he had carried a hatred for his daughter-in-law in his heart. And now he found out the truth and realized he had accused her for nothing. He had thought so many bad things, and she wasn't guilty of anything. She had been faithful to her husband and acted for the good of the firm. For a long time, the rich Noah sat hugging each other on the bench. In the end, Noah felt how easy it was to breathe, as if he had dropped a heavy weight from his soul. How it was just being happy. She was just happy that she remembered everything. And as hard as it was, when she found out her husband had died, she was still happy because she still had her daughter. The next day, Noah took everyone home. Christina was with them as well. All the way home, Nancy held her mother's hand and kept looking into her face, and she chattered nonstop. She was trying to tell her mother what had happened during the whole time she had been away. Of course, it would take a very long time and not enough hours on the road to tell everything, catching every word her daughter said. She held her hand tightly. Wendy kept turning back, looking at her daughter-in-law and granddaughter. Yes, they had lost their only son. They had Nancy, and now Christina had been found. It was the truest of miracles. When they returned home, Noah immediately set about recovering Christina's papers. A few days later, Christina told him that she remembered a place where David might have been hiding. She told him about it, and Noah immediately started looking for him. He hired a whole team of people to search for David, and within a week, they found him. Noah couldn't believe his luck. He immediately took to the police all the documents that testified to David's fraud. Christina was a witness. She also wrote a statement saying that she believed David was responsible for the accident. The very next day, police caught David red-handed. They found a secret room in his home where he had stored all of his data over the years he worked for the firm money. It was terribly stupid. He didn't even keep it in an account. He just stacked it up in one room. I don't know why he did it, whether he admired it, whether he was so greedy, whether he was so afraid of being caught, of having that money taken away. You never know. There was a reason for his behavior. However, his guilt was soon proven and he was jailed. All the money was seized and returned to Noah and his firm. And all this money Noah had transferred to Christina's account. Now it was her money. It was Christina and Nancy's money.